And good afternoon. It is Thursday, October 8th, 2020. It's about 3:35 in the afternoon now. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the ripple effect of historical events, specifically the First World War and the events that led up to World War II. This was really, at its core, a family affair. There are times that, though few they may be, when a family squabble is on such a massive scale that it actually influences and even changes history. Now, one such era is that of the First World War, also called the War to End All Wars, which involved, amongst its many participating nations, those led by three of Queen Victoria's grandchildren, or at least two, with the Empress Consort Alexandra Feodorovna being married to Tsar Nicholas. She was Victoria's granddaughter. Now, out of her 42 grandchildren, Victoria's 42 grandchildren, the rulers of England, Germany, and Russia were the most powerful at this point. King George was in England, Kaiser Wilhelm had Germany, and Tsar Nicholas, who would be her grandson-in-law, ruled over Russia. Now, between their nationalistic and imperialistic philosophies, perhaps this conflagration, this war was unavoidable. In a war that claimed millions of lives over 4 years' time, 90% were combatants, though. So they were enemy combatants, or at least participants in the war, and about 10% of the casualties of World War I were non-combatants, or civilians. But sadly, the end of one World War was inadvertently the cause of another, and the Second World War resulted in a 50% civilian casualty rate. That's one half of over 100 million people. And so, what ended up being three cousins, or the families of three cousins, and their respective nations, they led the entire world down a dark path of death and destruction unequaled in human history up to this point. Now, Russia's involvement in the war played a large part in the Bolshevik Revolution, and it led Russia down its own path of communism and the brutal reign of Joseph Stalin, and a Cold War with the United States. The British Empire, once so vast that it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire, this would gradually diminish as well. But Germany bore the brunt of the guilt as well as the sanctions for the war. As a result of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany would rise up once again as a belligerent nation, this time a generation later, led by a dictator with a seemingly supernatural gift for rhetoric and oration, swaying millions of people to his cause, and a singular ideology of Aryan conquest. Had Adolf Hitler been accepted into art school at Vienna, perhaps modern history would be vastly different. However, if not for Versailles, maybe Hitler would be just another bigot spouting racist propaganda. Now, during World War I, the nations of Germany and Italy were consolidated. They were unified nations, and they initiated new rivalries throughout the whole of Europe at this point. The German Kaiser began to challenge England's world supremacy. He created a massive industrial muscle at home. He had an empire overseas and abroad, and he had a navy, a very strong navy, and this threatened the balance of power. And because it threatened the balance of power throughout Europe, it threatened the peace of Europe. Now, the war officially began on June 28, 1914, the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian heir Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And we'll get into that another time as well, because that was an interesting society or group of people that did that. That was it's very conspiratorial, but it's an very interesting story, but a sad one as well. But we'll get into that at another time. But soon, like the Foreign Secretary of Britain had said, the lamps are going out all over Europe, and we shall not see them lit again in our lifetime. I mean, it was a sad and prophetic statement. After the dust settled and the smoke cleared, the lands where they fought looked like the moon. It may as well have been. Blasted with holes and riddled with trenches from trench warfare. It was just a horrible war. Just a very, very terrible thing. And after the war, at Versailles, June 28, 1919, Germany would be forced to sign a treaty, and the stipulations of which was so harsh that Germany would be forced to relinquish 13% of its pre-war lands. Not just lands that they gained during the war, but that they held before it, including all of its previously held overseas territories. The reparations that they had to pay yearly would lead to the nation's poverty. And the protests of the delegates in Germany fell on deaf ears. 20 years later, still. But the French, they sought reparations and security from future invasions by Germany, understandably so. But ultimately, the sanctions proved to be so destructive that the treaty is seen by many historians to be the catalyst for the rise of Nazi Germany. And I don't think there's really any way to deny this. The fact that Germany had to bear the brunt and claim total responsibility and total fault for a war that basically bankrupted them. And we've seen the pictures of the Germans carrying in wheelbarrows, they're carrying down Deutschmarks to buy a loaf of bread. It was a harsh thing that they faced. And unfortunately, they ended up with a maniac in power, a bigot, a supremacist, a true racist in Adolf Hitler. And so we can get into some of those other things at another time, at another date. But for right now, thank you for listening. Hopefully you learned a little bit from this. We always like to take questions and comments, so feel free to drop me a line in the comment section and let me know if you'd like to hear more. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.